nearly day by day. Amen. Please be seated. I hate to do this to you all because I know just 2 weeks ago you had Chris Griffin, the singing preacher, up here. But today is All Saints Day, so I can't help myself. I sing a song of the saints of God, patient and brave and true, who fought and toiled and lived and died for the Lord they loved and knew. And one was a doctor, and one was a queen, and one was a shepherdess on the green. They were all of them saints of God, and I mean God helping to be one too. It is All Saints Day today, and if you are half as Episcopally nerdy as I am, you will have noticed that there is a saint appointed to just about every day of the year in our calendar. You can look this up, I mean it. You can look up the calendar of the saints, and just about every day there's a saint of some sort appointed for that day. Now, we often don't get to talk about a lot of them on Sunday mornings when we gather because, of course, the focus of that day is always on Jesus. So take my namesake, St. Stephen. St. Stephen, patron saint of all Stephens, right? He was Stephen Buzard, I'm just saying. But also first deacon of the church, first martyr of the church. His day is December 26th, but if December 26th falls on a Sunday, of course we don't celebrate St. Stephen because we're here for Jesus that day. So as a result, we don't get to talk about a lot of the saints, except for All Saints Day. All Saints Day, and you can use this in your Episcopal pub trivia. When not only do we get to celebrate the saints today, but if we miss All Saints, like we did because it's November 1st, we get to move it to this Sunday so we still get to celebrate All Saints. You don't do that with other holidays in the church, so it's a very special occasion. And I've got a great way for us to celebrate it. I think the best way to celebrate All Saints Day is for you to take some time. Go over that calendar of saints. Look at the notable days in your life and look at the saints appointed for that day and what you can learn about them. Because there's really only so much use in a saint if you look at them and say, that person sure was great. Great, thanks for them, but it doesn't do anything in here. Hopefully, the purpose of studying and understanding our saints is for us to look at ourselves and be inspired, to look at how their example can shape us and lead us to be the kind of people we're called to be in the world. So I try to do that work, and I commend that to you all. My birthday's June 25th. Anybody else? June 25th? Okay. June 25th. It's St. James Weldon Johnson. James Weldon Johnson, civil rights advocate, was a poet, wrote lots of great poems. It's where we get lift every voice and sing. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. So you got two for one today. But wasn't just a poet, was also a lawyer. And so used the gifts God had given him to fight for civil rights, to look at people who had been denied the right of human dignity because of the color of their skin and said, no, this person is just as much made in the image of God as anyone else, and they deserve the same human dignity and respect. And he fought that in his poems, he fought that in the courtroom, and we revere him as a saint for that example. He's a great saint. He's my saint on my birthday. If I look at, we used to do this First Communion classes back in the day when you were baptized, but you weren't given communion until you'd done First Communion classes. Some of us I know remember those. And in my First Communion class, I was appointed my saint. My saint was St. Clare of Assisi. St. Clare of Assisi, who was a wealthy woman who, inspired by St. Francis, realized that the best way that she could show gratitude for the riches that God had bestowed upon her was to show thanks by sharing them, sharing it abundantly, giving of all of the gold that she had, the wealth that she had, the strength in her bones, the years of her life, and to give thanks to that by sharing it with those around her who needed it the most. That's a great example of somebody to follow as a saint. What would that mean for us to be people who look at how lucky we are to be here in this place, and we show our gratitude by saying, I want to contribute, as a way of saying thank you? When I continued on, I had to do my confirmation classes, and I was confirmed on Hiram Hisano Kano Day, St. Hiram Hisano Kano, who I know we don't talk about enough. We don't talk about him enough because he was a Japanese-American Episcopal priest who, at the bombing of Pearl Harbor, was arrested and put in a concentration camp, in an internment camp here in the United States because of his Japanese descent. And rather than let that crush him and break his spirit and break his faith, instead he became the priest to the people in that internment camp, who otherwise didn't have anyone. And years after he was released, it took the United States some 40 years to apologize and offer reparations for his incarceration. And he said, I don't need reparations for this, because this thing that you meant for ill, God used for good. Just like Joseph and his brothers in Egypt, St. Kano looked at how God had put him in that camp so that he could be a priest to people in their darkest time in their lives, and they had him as a light representing Christ to them. So God used it for good. When I ended up being ordained a priest, when I was ordained as a clergy person, I was ordained on Florence Leighton Oy Day. Florence Leighton Oy was a woman who, when the war had broken out, when World War II had broken out, she found that the men had all been taken away to go fight in the war, the priests were all gone, and her people were left on an island, literally on an island to themselves, with no one to be their pastor. And although every other person looked at her and said, because you're a woman, you can't be appointed by God as a pastor to these people, she knew God had appointed her to be their pastor. And she stepped in and she became their priest and was the person that community needed in, again, their darkest times in war. And while it was many, many years before we were approaching gender parity, and let's be realistic, we still haven't reached gender parity in the church, but Florence Leighton Oy was maybe that first crack in the wall, the first opening of that door. And then when I was installed as a rector at my first church where I was serving, that was on St. Thomas Gallaudet Day. St. Thomas Gallaudet, of the Gallaudet family of Thomas Gallaudet Sr., who had founded the first school for the deaf and Gallaudet School for the Deaf in Washington, D.C. And his son Thomas wanted to be a priest. And Thomas the elder looked at him and said, before you go and learn about the kind of priest you want to be, I want you to spend time with a community in need and discover the kind of priest they need you to be. And so he spent years teaching, and pastoring, leading a deaf community, learning the kind of priest and pastor that they needed, and eventually became an Episcopal priest. Found a young Henry Siles, a young deaf man who would end up being inspired to become the first ever deaf priest in the church. Founding whole communities that prior to that had been cut off from the church because they hadn't been able to hear, and he founded communities that opened the church up to them and brought them in and included them. And we remember him as a saint to this day, both of them, Thomas Gallaudet and Henry Siles. Now, I don't bring all of these saints up just to say that some are better than others. I find these inspiring examples, and part of why I find them inspiring is each of these people did things we can do. So when you look through the calendar of the saints, who do you find in there? The person like James Wendell Johnson, who looked at the gifts he had been given and used them to help equality and justice. Claire of Assisi, who looked at the gifts that she had been given and saw it as a time to show thanks by giving back. Of people who sought to not just be the pastor they wanted to be, but sought to be the pastor that their people needed them to be. These are all things we can do. I dare say should do. And so maybe your saint, you may look up your birthday saint or your baptism day saint, and it may be, St. Ethelred, patron saint of toaster ovens. And it's not that inspiring, but I would encourage you to keep looking. I would encourage you to keep looking, because you might find, even if you fall on St. Peter, and you say, well, I can't be a saint like that. I can't walk on water. I can't raise the dead. I can't heal the crippled the way St. Peter did. But you know what? Peter was a saint in a lot of other ways. He was also a saint who messed up a lot. He was kind of a ne'er-do-well, but he never stopped trying. We can be inspired by that. He was a saint who lost his temper and was impatient, but he never stopped trying. We can be inspired by that. He was a saint who fell short, who betrayed Jesus in his darkest time, who doubted and struggled, but he never stopped trying. We can be inspired by that. And I dare say, as we now welcome our 2st new baptized members of our community in Edla and in Crystal, that I'm excited for you, because you're entering into a great cloud of witnesses, as we say. A group of saints who were just like us, and we can be just like them. They were all of them saints of God, and I mean God helping to be one too. Amen.